Are you a foreign national that does a lot of business between your home country and the United States? If that's you, then I want you to stay tuned today because we're going to talk about the import-export visa that's available for people like you who do a lot of business with the United States and your home country. And the E-1 visa is what this is called, and it's a lot less familiar to people than the more well-known E-2 investor visa. But if you qualify for this visa, I actually like it a lot better than the E-2. So I want you to learn a little more about it, figure out if this might be right for you, and then figure out your next steps. So let's go. My name is Kaylani Hawks Villafranca. I'm a U.S. immigration attorney based in Texas with clients all over the world. And most of my clients are business owners in Latin America, Spain, or elsewhere in the world who want to come to the United States to expand their businesses here. One of the main visas I use to help them is called the E-1 visa. It is for people who do a large volume of imports and exports between the United States and their home country. So let's talk through what the E-1 visa is, how you know if you're eligible, and the next steps. So the E-1 visa, if you are granted your E-1, will allow you the permission to move to the United States with your family, that's your spouse and any children who are under 21, and to live here and work here to run your import-export business. Now, not every person is going to qualify, and the first thing we have to know is, where are you from? If you are from a country that has a treaty with the United States to support the E-1 visa, that's great, and we can see if you're eligible. Unfortunately, not every country has a treaty that supports these kinds of visas. So that's the first thing you need to know is, where am I from? And we want to know any nationality you have. So if you're Mexican and Spanish, or if you're Chinese and Argentinian, like all of your nationalities count. You just need one. And then I have a long list of countries that have E-1 treaties with the United States. Now, keep in mind, if you've heard about the E-2 and you know your country has an E-2 treaty, that doesn't mean you have an E-1 treaty. Sometimes a country has both, and sometimes they just have one, and sometimes they don't have any. So we need to know, first of all, where you're from. Does your country have a treaty with the US to support these visas? If so, then what's our next step? Then we need a business. It can be either a US business or a foreign business. And this is different than the investor visa. So if you've heard about the investor visa and you've thought about that, you'll know for an investor visa, you have to have a United States-based business. And you have to have invested money in that US-based business. Not for an E-1. For an E-1, the business that supports your visa can be either a company that is formed in the United States or a foreign company. So many of my clients have US businesses, but many have foreign businesses, and it just depends on how you're set up, which one will be better for your particular case. And some of my clients have both, and then we pick, okay, which company is going to support this visa, which is a stronger case for your visa. So you have a company, and that company, either the US company or the foreign company, does a lot of international trade with the United States and your home country. So let's say you're from Mexico. So what we want to be able to show is that you are importing or exporting goods or services between the US and Mexico. You heard me say goods or services. That's really broad. So essentially anything that is actually something normally traded in interstate commerce counts. So some of my clients import and export food products. Other clients import and export software services. This is a really common thing that's happening in the tech industry and also in other businesses, but primarily in tech right now, is you'll have a US company that will sell products to US consumers, software products, and then they will hire their foreign company, like sort of their software engineers based in Mexico, to actually do the work. And then they will import that work to the United States to be delivered to US clients. Now, obviously, this is all just happening on the computers. There's no like actual person walking software across the border. But that's the import of services into the United States. And that import of services counts for your import-export visa. And so I want you to think about that. If you have a service-based business, that you still might be eligible for an import-export visa, because a lot of people don't think about that. And those can be really strong, great cases that the law 100% supports. Okay, so How do we know if your trade is enough? That's a really important question. Well, first, we need to look at all of your international trade. So in this business we're talking about, our Mexican business imports software products. We need to know if you also export software services from Mexico to any other country. And that's because for this visa, we look at the total volume of exports that your business does from your home country to all the other countries in the world. We have to make sure that your exports going to the US are at least 50%, at least half of your total international trade volume. If they're not, you're not eligible. So it's a hard line right there. There's no discretion, there's no creativity. We have to be able to show that at least half of your international trade goes between the US and your home country. Now, you might have a lot of domestic trade, and that's okay. We don't count the domestic trade at all for this case. So say you do $1 million a year in domestic trade inside Mexico, but you do $600,000 a year between Mexico and the US. Well, that's less than half of your total volume, but that doesn't matter because that $1 million that stays in the domestic market isn't important for this kind of case. We don't count it, it's not relevant. What we need to know is that $600,000 that goes between Mexico and the US, what percentage of your total international trade volume is that? If you only trade with the US, it's 100% and you have a great case. But say you send $600,000 worth of services to the US, but you send $1 million worth of services to various European companies, now we don't have a case anymore because your total international trade volume is 1.6 million and only 600,000 is going to the US, which is less than half. Don't have a case. But let's assume for our purposes, so that we can keep going with our E-1 eligibility analysis, that your company has international trade with just the US or with primarily the United States, so that we can easily show that more than half of your international trade goes between the US and your home country. And keep in mind, when we're talking about this, it doesn't have to flow to the US, it can also flow out from the US. So you could have a US-based business that buys product in the US and exports it to Germany, where you sell it to German clients. And that's great. You can go either way. You can go to the US or from the US and back and forth between your home country. So once we've shown that you have at least half of your international trade flowing between the US and your home country, now we need to show that it's substantial. Now, what does that mean? The law doesn't define it at all. And so this is where it gets tricky. And we have to be able to show a history of substantial international trade between the two countries. Sort of rule of thumb is that we want to be able to show at least $10,000 a month in trade volume for a period of 3 to 4 months at a minimum before you file your case. This sort of case is not forward-looking. It is backwards-looking. You have to show the trade already exists and that it's reasonably likely to continue. The second part is easy. You just say, yes, I'm going to keep doing this. That's why I want my visa. The first part is what is harder to prove. You have to show the trade really is in existence. The more, the better. So if you have a history of several years of trade, okay, now we have a stronger case. Or if you have a history of 3 to 4 months of trade, but the volume is already at $1 million, great, that's a much stronger case. Something else to keep in mind is that this case is very much intended for small businesses. So I don't want you to be worried that your business isn't big enough. The law itself explicitly states that the small businessman, it actually says businessman, but the small business person, men or women, should be supported in this case if they can show a history of trade with multiple transactions over time. So the officers are going to look at how many clients do you have? How many transactions have you engaged in? How frequently are they taking place? One large transaction is not going to be enough because that's not a history. That's one purchase. So you might purchase $800,000 of goods one time and export it one time 8 months ago. That's a terrible case. I would much prefer to see $10,000 a week for several months in a row, continuing with multiple clients. So you want to be able to think about this from the consular officer's perspective. What they want to see is this is really a viable business that's going to continue to support exchanges between the two countries, because that's why the treaty exists and that created this visa, is to support that international exchange between these two countries. So you want to be able to show, look, my business really does that. Like I have all these clients, I have all these transactions. Here are my plans to grow if I get this visa, so I'll do even more of it. So think about for your company, are you able to do that? Do you already have a history of existing trade of goods or of services? And if you do, I want you to think about the E-1 visa as a good option for you instead of an E-2, because I like it so much better. And I'll tell you why. Some clients are not going to be eligible for an E-1 because their business is purely based in the US. It serves US clients. And so it's an E-2 business. You need to invest money, and that's how you get your visa. But for clients who have a business that already engages in international trade or is planning to do so, then this visa is so much better for several reasons. Because it is generally easier to show eligibility. That's because you don't have to invest any money. You have to show a history of trade, but if your business is one that naturally engages in trade, that's going to be possible for you to do without much effort because that's what your business does. It engages in trade of goods or services. You don't have to invest any money, so it's cheaper for you. Obviously, if somebody said, do you want to invest $100,000 or not invest $100,000, you probably would say no if you had an option, right? If you can get your visa without spending a bunch of money. So that's good. 2 is we don't have to prove something called marginality for this case. To win your E-2 case, I have to prove that your business is not marginal. What that means is that I have to prove your business is going to make enough money and have employees and do something other than just provide an income necessary for the person who holds the visa to live in the United States. I don't have to prove that for E-1. It's not part of the law for an E-1 case. So I just generally have to prove you're going to make enough money to support your life in the US, pay your own salary, and we're good. Obviously, a bigger business is better, but we don't have this legal concept of marginality in an E-1 visa that can be a real sticking point for E-2 cases. So if we can avoid that, obviously let's do that. It can be easier to renew your visa. So your E-visa is going to come from a term of 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 years. It depends on your country. Most countries have E-visa validity of about 4 or 5 years. Some are much less, but most of the ones I work with, Canada, Mexico, Spain, Colombia, Argentina, are like 4 or 5 years. At the end of that 4 or 5 years, you're going to be able to renew. It's going to be easier to renew your E-1 visa than your E-2 visa. Let's assume that both your E-1 business or your E-2 business continue to exist. It's much easier for me to prove renewal of your E-1 visa because I just have to show your trade is continuing. So if your business keeps functioning, you keep doing a decent volume of international trade, we're going to be able to renew your visa. For your E-2 visa, we get back to that question about marginality. When you first apply for your E-2 visa for an investment, you have to show your business will not be marginal. And then when it comes time to renew, you have to prove it's in fact not marginal. You have to show you made so much money. You have to show your profits. You have to show the employees. And a lot of visas are denied at that point because they can't get over, the business hasn't been successful enough to prove they're not marginal. So with an E-1, we avoid that concern, and a renewal can be easier as long as you still are engaging in international trade. And last but not least, it can be faster. It's not always faster, but for example, in Mexico right now, E-2 visas are taking 6 to 8 months, and E-1 visas are taking about a month. Okay, that's way better. These processing times change, so just processing time alone should not be a reason for you to go one way or another with your visa, but is something to keep in mind if you know that your business could be eligible for an E-1 or an E-2, and figuring out what the processing times are in your country. Often they're going to be exactly the same because it's the same office that processes E-1 and E-2, but for example, in Mexico, it's a completely different consulate. Monterrey and Tijuana process E-1s, and Mexico City and Ciudad Juarez process E-2s. So they're different, and they have different processing times. And Monterrey right now is at a month, which is great. I love it. So those are things to think about. If you're eligible for an E-1, or if you think you might be eligible for an E-1, I really want you to get that evaluated and figure it out before you spend time and money investing in your E-2 business and building up an E-2 case that you might not have to do because you're already eligible for an E-1. Okay, so we've talked through today just some high-level eligibility points for an E-1 visa. The things I want you to take away are the E-1 visa is a US visa that gives you the right to live and work in the US in your business that involves import and export of goods or services between the United States and your home country. To prove you're eligible, you need to know that you're from a country that has a treaty with the US to support this visa. You need to know that you have an existing business either in the United States or in your home country that already is engaging in the trade of goods or services between the two countries, the US and wherever you're from. And you need to show that at least half of your global international trade goes between the US and your home country, and that it's already in existence and we can show a history of trade over time to support your visa application. If we can show those things, then you can be eligible for an E-1 visa and you can move to the US with your family, your spouse, and any kids under 21 to live and work here in your US business. And something important to keep in mind is your spouse will get a work permit unrestricted. Your spouse is going to be able to work wherever he or she wants to work in the US, which is a really cool benefit of an E-1 visa. I hope this has been really helpful. If you'd like to chat more, figure out if you might be eligible, give me a call. My number is here below, 512-675-2945. This is what I do all day long, is talk to clients about e-visas, file e-visas, help clients prep for e-visa interviews. It's most of my practice. And so I'd love to talk to you about it. Give me a call.